So there was a slight typo in the title. It should be higher state of consciousness rather than high state of consciousness, although high sounds pretty good too. So I'm going to try to propose a cognitive phenomenological theory of theosis, not to diminish or or in any way reduce its sort of logical, hermeneutic, ontological, theological dimensions. But in order to address two interlocking concerns and potentially build a bridge for comparison to Vedantic moksha and Zen satori, although I'm not going to talk about them, I'm going to talk about what might we discover from the cognitive science of theosis that could make such a bridging possible. Okay? I would like to talk about Satori and Zen, but I'm sure you wouldn't like to listen to me for 3 hours. So the two concerns I have is, and these are well attested in the literature, is theosis as some form of cognition. I'll remind you that cognition means knowing. It doesn't mean just merely propositional knowing. Cognitive science studies attention, affect, and perception as well. So it's knowing very broadly construed. Secondly, theosis is a form of practice. There's things you can do to practice the transformation, or at least to make yourself more prone to the transformation that is defining of theosis. I'm going to begin with a brief overview of a couple of methodological points to go towards a methodological proposal drawn from some of my earlier work, my work on 2013 with Leo Ferraro on the cognitive science of wisdom, 2016, Vervaeke and Ferraro on mindfulness, in 2024, Vervaeke on mindfulness. The first thing is to draw a point from, methodological point is to draw a point from schism, about epistemology, but Leo Ferraro and I used it to make the same point about wisdom. You actually have two kinds of theories in epistemology. You have a product theory, which gives you a feature list, a list of features of what the telos, what is the wisdom state when it has been realized? What does it look like? What's a good description of it? And you can do that, and so you can propose that knowledge looks like this. Knowledge is justified true belief. That's such a feature list, standard one. You do the same thing with wisdom. There's a problem with feature lists, and feature lists actually don't convey our deep understanding of something. This was work that's been long-standing in the cognitive psychology of concepts. Even though we love feature lists, they don't really capture what's essential. You ask people what a bird is, they'll say it has wings, feathers, a beak, and it flies. So if I pile a bunch of feathers here, a couple of wings, and a beak, gather them together and throw them into the air, I've satisfied the definition, but I don't have a bird. I have a David Cronenberg movie, perhaps. What's missing, of course, many of you would say the formal cause. That language has now been reintroduced into cognitive science, by the way. The structural functional organization is missing. The other problem with a product theory is it misses what is called a process theory. A process theory is a method for realizing the telos. Yes, but how does one become wise? What does one do in order to become wise? And there, for example, you need an independent account of what foolishness might be, such that wisdom can overcome it. So what you need is a method that will actually put together that structure, that missing formal cause, so that it functions in a reliable and predictable manner. So this would be a method for putting together the bird, if I could put it that way. Now, both of these presuppose each other. If you're giving a product theory, you have some presupposition of what are the processes, the epistemic processes that lead to knowledge. And when you're giving a process theory, like positivism, which is a process theory, this is the way in which knowledge is acquired, right? And then you have some presupposition of what knowledge looks like. Knowledge looks like science. So these two things are actually always present, but what happens is one is foregrounded and the other is backgrounded. And what you need to do is actually have both kinds of theories. And I would say that a good theory attempts to put both together. Now, if you take a look at a lot of the current literature around theosis, you'll find both kinds of theories in place. I'm just choosing two examples from each, just for exemplary purposes. It's not any kind of exhaustive list. So you have Karamov's 2009, the beauty of unity and the harmony of the whole, the concept of theosis and the theology of pseudo-Dionysus, the Areopagus. You know that's an academic book because the title is so long. It also highlights the role of beauty. Another book is Philip Ivanovich from 2019, desiring the beautiful, erotic, aesthetic dimension of divination in Dionysius, the Areopagite, and Maximus, the confessor. Again, emphasizing beauty. But there are equally available to process theories. We have Elijah John's book from 2020, Mystical Past of Christian Theosis, Practical Exercises for Experiencing Christian Purification, Illumination, Glorification, and that's from 2020. And also from 2020, Father Joshua Schuping's A Manual of Theosis, Orthodox Christian Instruction as the Theory and Practice of Stillness, Watchfulness, and Ceaseless Prayer. Now, I am somebody who has for 33 years been practicing Vipassana meditation, meta-contemplation, Tai Chi Chuan, and about 15 years Stoic and Neoplatonic contemplation. And what was intriguing was the presence of a lot of things that were familiar from my Buddhist training in these two manuals. And that was encouraging in terms of the potential for the kind of theory I'm arguing for. So what does a process theory need? Well, process theory needs a problem to be solved, a goal that wants to be reached but is difficult to reach. And you first of all need a diagnosis. What is that problem? How is it to be resolved? And of course, this strategy goes way back. It's clearly present in Plato and Aristotle. It comes into prominence in the explicit declaration by the Hellenistic philosophers that the philosopher is the physician of the soul. Call no man a philosopher who has not alleviated the suffering of others. That's Epicurus. And this, of course, was addressing the meaning crisis of the Hellenistic period. So you need a diagnosis, and then you need a prognosis. You need a method of practice, set of procedures for cultivating certain skills and traits. And you need phenomenological markers, benchmarks, touchstones that tell you what it is like when you're doing it right. This is what it's like when you're doing it right. This is perspectival knowing. This is the kind of knowing that's not carried in propositions or in your skills, but it's carried in your state of consciousness and how it orients you and allows you to acquire, educate, and apply your particular skills, traits, and traits. And ultimately, what you're trying to cultivate are certain character traits, and this is your participatory knowing. I'll talk a lot more about this later, just a brief overview now. This is the kind of knowing that you get by identifying with something. You can do that very locally or identifying with a particular worldview. It's the simultaneous process of how the self and the world are co-identified. So you're always shaping your agency in a particular way and shaping the environment into a particular arena of action. So for example, I'm assuming the role of a professor, and this is a academic talk. I would not be assuming this role or talking this way when I get home to see my beloved Sarah. She would think I'd gone insane. Okay, so I'm going to call that kind of knowing through that deep kind of participatory identification. I think this points more towards gnosis, where that perspectival knowing points more towards noesis, which ultimately means noticing, sizing up. Next point I'm going to make is that theosis involves a comprehensive transformation of some kind. The descriptions are very repetitive on this, very comprehensive transformation of the individual. So that if there's a cognitive dimension, it's going to involve a comprehensive cognitive transformation. I'm not going to repeat an argument I've made repeatedly elsewhere. I think that is what we are typically pointing to when we use the word wisdom. We're pointing to a comprehensive cognitive transformation. That's how it's unlike a particular skill, particular theory, particular character trait. We're talking about something very comprehensive of a person. Okay. One way of thinking of that comprehensive, it has to go from the primordial aspects of our cognition towards its more ultimate aspects. And I'll lay that out with a particular hypothesis. I'm going to start with what I've been arguing since 1997, up until I just published last year, 2024, is, I think, the primordial process, the core of cognition. And this is a process I call relevance realization. And it is the process that they are now bumbling their way towards as they're trying to generate artificial general intelligence. This is the process, and you're doing it right now. The amount of information you can pay attention to in this room is overwhelmingly vast. And the possible combinations of how you could pay attention to it, the number of such combinations is greater than the number of atomic particles in the universe. You could look at this corner here, the tip of my pencil, my nose, the gestalt of my face, Douglas's hair, Ben's glasses. That's one pattern you could do. Now think of all the other patterns, including looking at the floor. Then, of all the things you could remember, you could try and connect your knowledge of cats to this lecture right now. I don't know why you would, but you could. Okay? All the information in your long-term memory and all the possible combinations is, again, greater than the number of atomic particles in the universe. The number of possibilities you could logically consider is as great as the number of possible well-formed logical propositions, which is uncountably large. The number of sequences of behavior you can generate, also very, very large. And here's what's interesting. You're doing it right now. You're zeroing in on the relevant information to pay attention to remember, possibilities to consider, and actions to perform. You're doing it like that. Like that. And here's the almost Zen koan thing about it. You're not doing it by considering all that information and ruling it out as irrelevant. You're ignoring it such that it is obvious to you what you should pay attention to. The central power of your general intelligence is that you are able to quickly notice what is obvious and what is obvious for you to do in such a way that you can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains for a wide variety of goals, use a wide variety of methods in ways that all predict each other very strongly. That's relevance realization. It's a key ability. You're doing it right now in your attention. This gives you an idea of how relevance is realized by your embodied, enacted brain. When you have one attentional network that is task focused, it's trying to keep you focused on me. Okay? It's task focused, it's world focused. You have another one, the default mode network, which is self-focused. It's self-focused. This is what causes you to mind wander. Okay? And both of them are connected to your salience network. Salience is how things stand out, grab your attention. We'll come back to salience and its deep relationship with attention in a minute. Now, here's the thing. What happens is you may wonder, why do I mind wander? Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could just have a laser focus all the time? No, you'd actually be grotesquely stupid. That's kind of what computers are. Okay. You say, well, why? See, what happens is, right, you're focusing on the task and you're rendering a few things as relevant to you by how they're salient to you. Your default mode network takes you away for a minute, wanders, and introduces variation, things you could think about. Now, most of them are useless, and you kill most of them off. You notice I'm doing something that's analogous to Darwinian evolution. You have the variation. Most of them are killed off, but you bring some back, and you evolve how you're taking what I'm saying. You restructure what is salient or relevant for you in the task. And so you keep changing. And what happens is those two are in what's called opponent processing. They're constantly pulling and pushing on each other, constantly doing this opponent processing. And you're constantly shifting how you're fitting yourself cognitively. That's what attention is, your cognitive fittingness to a situation or environment. Are you fitted here? Is your attention appropriate to the task? It's going like this constantly, 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 constantly. And what that opponent processing gives you is what's called optimal grip. There's always trade-offs. How should I look at this? Like this, like this, like this, close up, far away, from above, from below. These exclude each other. And what your brain does is trade between them with opponent processing until you get an optimal grip, the best possible way between all these trade-offs for how you need to use the object. Okay, so if I need to write, I'm going to look at it one way. If I need to throw it at him because he's suddenly getting violent, I need to look at it a different way. You're constantly evolving that optimal grip. So the process is opponent processing. The product is this optimal grip. I like to use the word, and I've used it repeatedly in publications, religio, because it means connectedness. And I'm trying to allude to that it has, right, a central connection to meaning in a more religious sense. Because as well, I won't have time to get into it, but meaning in life is largely about an enhanced sense of connectedness. Enhanced sense of connected to yourself, to other people, and to the world. All right. And what is salience? Salience is how relevance enters working memory and consciousness and caring. So it's how, so when things are salient, I orient to them, I'm conscious of them, and I'm now caring about this information much more than I'm caring about that information. Okay? So this is primordial in nature. I've argued, and I'm not going to repeat the arguments here, many of you have heard them ad nauseum, right? That relevance realization is presupposed by representation, by categorization, by inference, even by the formalization process that goes into any computational application. That was the paper that was published just last year in 2024, on naturalizing relevance realization. Any attempt to explain relevance realization using representations, propositions, inferential procedures, all of those are circular because all those processes require relevance realization in order to be generated. Okay? Relevance realization is primordial. It's deeper than propositional thought. Okay? Now, I want to bring out connection. I'm going to introduce a term, and I'm not trying to be vulgar because the term is a very famous academic publication, and it's On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt from 1980. This is important because Frankfurt makes an important distinction between lying and bullshit. And one of the things that is predictive of the meaning crisis, we did this in the 2017 book, is you can just use Google use. The use of bullshit is skyrocketing at an exponential rate. Okay, so people are feeling that this is a period in which we are drowning in a tsunami of bullshit. So the liar depends on your commitment to the truth. If I want to manipulate Matthew by lying to him, I tell him something I know is not true, but I try to convince him that it is true because I depend on him caring about truth and thereby altering his behavior. That's a lie. Okay? So, you know, if I was to say to Matthew, everybody in the world loves you, or something like that. That's a lie. Sorry. Okay. Now notice the bullshit artist does something very different. The bullshit artist gets you to be unconcerned, uncaring, notice the language, of the truth, and caught up in how salient something is. All of advertising works this way. Commercial, bottle of whiskey on the bar. For some reason, water condensed on the whiskey bottle running down. Gorgeous, sexually attractive people, all of them clearly sober, in a well-lit room, talking friendly and loving each other. Go into a bar. That's not a bar. You know it. You know it, and they know that you know. It doesn't matter. What they're doing is they're getting you into a state where you're unconcerned about whether or not it's true, and yet they're making the bottle of whiskey salient. So what happens when you go into the liquor store? It jumps out at you, salient, and you buy it. That's bullshit. Now here's the thing, you can't lie to yourself. We use that metaphor, it's a bad metaphor. I know it's not true that everybody loves me, but I'll still say everybody loves me. It's ridiculous. Okay? You can't do that. But here's the thing, you can bullshit yourself. You can bullshit yourself because of the nature of attention and its relationship to salience. Okay? Salience grabs attention, but attention can also create salience. Your left big toe. Salient to you now, isn't it? I hope you weren't thinking about it before. If you were, we should talk to somebody. Salience is bottom up. It comes up from the world to grab your attention, but it's also top down. It comes down from your cognition and generates new salience. So by paying attention, I can make something as salient. I remember it as salient, and then later it grabs my attention. And that's how you can bullshit yourself. That's what self-deception is. The engine that makes you adaptive also makes you perpetually prone to self-deception. And this, of course, is the first noble truth of Buddhism. So what makes you adaptive is self-organizing ignorance, your ability to ignore. And yet it can also lead you into self-deception. Okay? Now you have a capacity to notice that you've deceived yourself. It's called insight. This is when you have the aha. When you go, oh, I thought she was angry, but it turns out she's afraid. And what's salient, and therefore what's relevant, shifts for you when you have an aha moment. You realize that you have misframed it. Now, that machinery of intelligence is very complex, very self-organizing, bottom-up, top-down, many levels. So you have this highly complex system of looping with the environment, evolving, but also potentially deceiving you. Of course, this is the problem that the large language models are running in with you. They confabulate, they hallucinate, and they don't know what to do about it. Okay? What you can get is you can get those things we call spirals, or in what I termed in some of the publications, parasitic processing. Something really bad happens to you, and then your brain starts to predict, well, what's the chance of something bad happening like that again? And the thing is, you have what's called encoding specificity. You tend to remember things that happen to you in the same state that you're in. So when I'm really upset and worried, I tend to remember previous instances where I'm upset and worried. And then that triggers two biases. But when it's easy to remember it, I think it's highly possible. And then I have confirmation bias that makes me only look for more confirming evidence. And I start to become more anxious and worried that another bad thing is going to happen. And then that starts to make my cognition short-term, narrow, right? And inflexible. And so I start to screw up, which means I start to make mistakes, which makes the world look more threatening. So I get more, and you know what that is. That's the anxiety spiral. And you can get a panic attack out of that. Or you can spiral in such a complex way into depression. That's a kind of reciprocal narrowing. The world gets closer and closer to you and more threatening, and your ability to adapt and move or change, your flexibility reduces. You get reciprocal narrowing. Do you see that? It narrows down, you spiral down until you don't, there's nothing I can do. There's no future, there's no options. By the way, that reciprocal narrowing, this is the work of Mark Lewis, a good friend of mine, probably the world's leading expert in addiction. That's what addiction is. Reciprocal narrowing is addiction. That's what happens in addiction. The world gets narrower, more and more pressing. There's no future for me, and I lose all cognitive flexibility. I can't do anything other. Now I'm compelled. I have no future. There's a complete loss of agency. There's a complete loss of agency. I put it to you, and this is what I can't go over all the scholarship. This is what the Stoics are reflecting on when they name it pathe, right? Pathetic. Of course, that gets translated as passion, and then we put that into beer commercials, and it gets something like what a football team needs, and we've totally lost the original. Pathetic is the best way. When we say somebody's pathetic, we're usually indicating they have lost agency in some important way, and therefore lost the dignity that accrues to agency. Now, the thing is, I was once having dinner with Mark, and he was doing his theory of reciprocal narrowing, and I said to him, but Mark, if you can reciprocally narrow, can't you reciprocally open up? And I'm thinking of Plato and the cave and Anagoge, and he literally stood up, and he went, oh my God, you're right. Right? So there's a possibility of transformation of pathos into anagoge and the cultivation of wisdom by training attention and judgment. This, of course, is the primary Stoic appeal. And I want you to remember something, again, because our current notion of Stoic can often mislead us. Pathe is as much a cognitive as an emotional state. It is a form of misframing, like when you misframed her and said, I thought she was angry. Okay? The Stoics are on about judgment and attention as much as they are as about affect, as part of pathe. So this, of course, why they prescribe prosache, which I think the case is now becoming pretty clear. The closest we have for it in our current cultural milieu is mindfulness. the careful paying of attention that is designed to enhance our capacity for reducing self-deception and affording insight, because those are the same basic things. And this, of course, leads us to the deep connections between theosis and theoria, which are repeated in both kinds of literature, the product literature and the prose literature. Theoria is often translated as contemplation. That's a completely legitimate translation. Of course, theoria originally meant a pilgrimage, going from one place to another to see something new that would change who and what you are, and then you were supposed to return back. This is the work of Ward. Now, the thing about contemplation is we tend to lose that there's actually two poles to mindfulness. There's contemplation and meditation. Meditation is when you step back and look at how you're framing. Oh, I thought she was angry. That's the wrong framing. Contemplation is when you reframe, put on new glasses, but she's actually afraid. So you have practices where you're stepping back, like in Vipassana, and looking at your framing, and then practices when you're looking through a new framing, like trying to realize in Buddhism that all the world is impermanent or all the world is interconnected. And you're constantly going between those because they drive insight. In an insight, I have to break an inappropriate frame, reframe into a new frame, and see the world in a new and better fashion. And what that's supposed to do is that's supposed to, for the Stoics, transform pleasure into joy and pathe into apatheia, which does not mean apathy, right? It means something much more like sophrosyn, which is contrast. Kratia is controlling yourself, making yourself do what's honest. Sophrosyn is naturally being honest. It's like your salience landscaping just naturally tempts you to do the right thing, if I can put it that way. And this, of course, is the famous flowing with nature. Please remember the word, flowing with nature. Okay? So what's going on in apatheia is appropriate orientation and caring. There's a refinement of relevance realization that's transforming inner conflict back into that proper opponent processing. That you see that in virtue. Virtue is an attempt to do an opponent processing between excess and deficit. And so you get towards an optimal grip, the power to do what is good, a recovery of agency in an important way. And this was a central thing in the Stoics. The Stoics were on about how we're always doing this co-identification. We're assuming a certain role and we're assigning roles. I'm a professor, you are academics. I come in, I'm always assuming a certain role of agency and assigning certain roles in the arena. And this is what a worldview does. And what we're doing is we just have nested worldviews from the cosmos down to this room. And the Stoics are about trying to become aware of that entire nesting. This is why you had things like the view from above, which moved you up and down these scales of agent-arena relationship. Of course, you take Stoicism, you integrate it with Platonic anagoge and the tripartite soul, which the Stoics didn't agree with, and Aristotelian conformity theory, which is this like relevance realization, participatory knowing, knowing by being coupled to something, conforming with it, mutually shaping it and being shaped by it, right? And Neoplatonism takes all of those and puts them together. And of course, we should be looking now to Neoplatonism as the home for the explicit proposal of theosis. What the Stoics emphasized and was picked up by the Neoplatonists, right, which is the crucial features of Gnosis. In Gnosis, I indwell something. I try and look at the worlds through from the perspective of the sage, and then I do that until I can then, right, after I've indwelled the sage a lot of times, I can then look at it as if I were the sage. I've internalized the sage. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Realize your Buddha nature, right? Stoicism is the religion of internalizing Socrates, etc. What did you learn, Antisthenes? I learned how to talk to myself as if I were Socrates. And what this gives you, right, is this process of internalizing other people. It gives us our ability to reflect, to take a perspective on our own perspective, precisely what we're exercising in mindfulness. And this is, I was able to participate in the Wisdom Consensus paper of 2020, got all the researchers together. And one of the convergent idea was one of the central features of wisdom is your perspectival metacognition, your ability to take multiple perspectives on other people and on your own perspective taking. This is a central feature of wisdom. So this all lines up very well. And what we have is in a parallel, dynamical, self-organizing manner, we have a reciprocal opening between, we're getting a reordering of the psyche, the three parts of the psyche through the practice of the theoria. It reduces self-conflict so that our salience machinery, right, isn't driven by our passions in the gut or our desire for honor, but appropriately to the context. When it's short term, this should have a salience lead, social, this, long term, right, the noose, right? And we have to properly reorient them, we reduce their inner conflict. Once we do that, once that conflict is alleviated, our capacity to bullshit ourselves goes down tremendously. Because now we're trying to make sure that salience is more carefully tracking what is honorable and what is true in the right proportion. As that happens, we're going to get something that Maximus emphasizes. We're going to get a kind of ontological depth perception. We're going to stop confusing the criterion, pleasure, with the goal, the good. We're just going to stop looking at the sense appearance and see into the essence, as Maximus would say. Our culture is beset by confusing the criterion with the goal. You don't seek pleasure. You seek the goodness of something that is indicated to you by the pleasure it causes in you. The criterion is not the goal. Ontological depth perception is to not engage in that kind of bullshit where you make super salient the criterion and blind yourself to the good. When that diminishes, you can see deeply into things. This is what beauty is. Beauty is when appearances don't distract or distort or blind, but when they disclose a deeper underlying reality. This is why beauty is so wrapped up with theosis. And Wynne talks about this in Renewing the Senses from his book, 2013. And what you get is you get this enrichment of the sensuous field. So it's not like you're just conceiving of some other world. He goes through all these examples that James talks about in the Varieties of Religious Experience, where the whole world is at the level of the worldview and the sense of the self. Everything is now seen anew, fresh, alive, vibrant. It's adverbial. It's not adjectival. You're not looking at something. It's a manner, a new way in which all things are experienced or perceived. I think this can be understood, and this is a proposal from recent book, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis 2024. There's also some papers that are in submission right now of a cognitive continuum. This is how I'm going to take this machinery that I've laid out for you, what I think is going on in attention and how it relates to theoria and theosis, and then I want to put it into a continuum from the primordial aspects of your cognition, relevance, realization to the ultimate. The primordial aspect is known as fluency. Fluency is a form of, right? It's called domain general. Every aspect of your cognition, your brain uses this. So let me give you a clear example. If I give you a text and it's black on white, standard, compared to yellow on orange, the texts are equivalent. Do you understand? I ask you to read the text at different times, and I control for other variables. And I ask you which text, I ask you which one is more like, I'll ask you like about this one. How true do you think it is? Rating 1 to 10. 7. Same text. How true this is, but this is the yellow-orange, 4. No difference in the content. You understand? Semantic content is exactly equal. The truth valuation shifts dramatically. Why? Because the yellow-orange makes it hard for you to get an optimal grip on the text. And your brain processes a diminishment in optimal grip as I'm disconnected from reality, and therefore this is not true. Now, this is actually a really adaptive thing for your brain to do. Can it go wrong? Of course it can. It can be hijacked like anything else. But does it work a lot of the times in a lot of places? Yes, it does. It is very powerful. When you have an insight, according to Tobolensky and Reber, the aha, that's a spike in fluency. You suddenly get an even better optimal grip on the situation. In 2018, with Ariane Hara-Bennett and Leo Ferraro, I proposed that the flow experience that Csikszentmihalyi talks about, you probably all heard of that, you're in the zone, right? And it's got these features to it. You feel all the nattering, narrative, egocentric stuff in your head falls silent. You stop worrying. What are they thinking about me? Do they like me? Will they talk to me? How's my hair? How do I look? Is my shirt tucked in? How am I doing? All of that falls silent because you're totally absorbed in the task. You're completely at one. So I'm a martial artist. When I'm sparring, you get into the flow state and you're at one. Like you don't even like it's grace filled. It's effortless. Not that you're not putting in effort, but it's like I just find my arm going up into the block and pivoting so I can get a grab if I need to, and my punch coming through. It's called from me. It flows. I'm flowing with the situation. Remember? Flowing with nature. I'm flowing with the situation. I'm at one. Everything is super salient, like I'm having an ongoing aha moment. One insight is priming another. This is why things like jazz and video games and rock climbing induce flow, because you have to have an insight, and then you have to have another insight, and you have to have another insight until they start to cascade together and you flow. And flow is one of the powerful predictors of how meaningful your life is. If I want to ask you one question, not what you believe, not blah, 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 to find out and make a prediction about how meaningful your life is, I would ask you this question. How often do you get into the flow state? So we're already beginning to see the beginnings of kenosis here, at 1 minute. And we're starting to see the beginnings of kenosis. There's an emptying out of egocentrism. See, flow, this is why Zen cultivated it so much, especially Taoism. Flow tells you that your agency isn't lost when your egocentrism is lost. It tells you exactly the opposite, that your agency is enhanced and works at its very best when you lose egocentrism. It is the great disclosure of the lie of egocentrism that you can taste in your actual experience. And this is why it is experienced as joy, not pleasure. Joy. This decentering is what helps make you want. Igor Grossman's work. You get somebody to describe a problem, they'll describe it from the egocentric perspective, they have no solution. You get them to redescribe it from the third person perspective, and they'll have an insight into their problem. It's all in effect, decentering. Imagine if you were decentered and flowing at the same time. Now, imagine that you weren't flowing in a limited area like with martial arts. It's a very specific domain. In fact, something interesting happened to me when I was doing Tai Chi Chuan, because I was really concentrated on, like when I was, you get caught up in the phenomenology and you think I'm going to be a Buddha in a minute, because you're doing times when you're really like on fire, like, and I mean it, like you're sweating. Another time you're as cold as ice. And, oh, it's so cool and it's so weird and so wonderful. That doesn't really matter, by the way. What happened was people around me in graduate school, you remember graduate school? We all thought we were imposters and we were afraid of everybody else. They came up to me and they said, "What are you doing?" I thought, oh no, they found out. Well, I don't belong. I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "You're way more balanced in your argumentation. You're way more flexible in how you approach the situation. You're softer and you follow and listen better than you used to. What's going on?" The Tai Chi had transferred outside of the ritual context. Were aspects of it that were domain general. So in addition to the specific skills of fighting, I was flowing, and the skills I was training were my overarching skills of orientation and agency and arena identification. I was at this much grander level, higher level, what I meant to say. That's where the flow works. That's why video games don't generally transfer and people get addicted and depressed. So Ye in 2013 started to study these. When you have a flow experience at this level, this higher order level of orientation and co-identification, that's a mystical experience. You know what some people do when they have a mystical experience? Nothing. They go, "That was weird." Mystical experiences are not necessarily transformative experiences. A mystical experience has to be taken up in order to be a transformative experience in the right way. It needs a supporting philosophical framework and a community of feedback, like my fellow students who were giving me feedback, right? Now, what he showed is when that happens to people, Ye et al. In 2017, people get this experience, which he called it the noetic quality. They get the sense of the really real. That's the language they use. They do this really weird thing. They say that alternative state of consciousness was really real and compared to this. That's the opposite of what we typically do. We typically say this is the really real and the dream state or the drug state is the illusion, but they say that was the really real and then this is what they reliably do. They change their identities, their roles, their relationships, and their lives because they want to be in conformity to the really real. This is, I propose to you, where we're now getting into theosis. There has been a gnosis, a mystical experience that has henosis and kenosis in it, but it has been taken up appropriately into a transformation so that one is now trying to get closer and closer to what is ultimate. From the primordial to the ultimate, this is the cognitive continuum. I don't think there's anything particularly arrogant about theosis at all, if I'm understanding at least the cognitive dimension of it. Theosis just is on this continuum. This is, of course, a classic teaching of Zen. You're always enlightened. You just don't realize it. Okay? There's an anagogic flow from primordiality to ultimacy within a higher state of consciousness, flow at this higher state, in which one is internalizing and indwelling not this person, not the coach, not Socrates, but ultimate reality itself. That's the sage. You're participating in God. You're being transformed comprehensively and acquiring a kind of wisdom. The relevance realization has been so attuned to track what's real, it comes into the face of what is ultimately real, and it realizes its own irrelevance and falls silent. Now, of course, you cannot manufacture any of this. We've all been here. I need an insight. Go. Is that how insight works? No. Can't manufacture an insight. But what are the things that make you more prone to insight or mindfulness, by the way, which makes you more prone to flow? The more mindfulness you practice, more theoria, the more likely you will have insights that are systematic and systemic. The more likely you will get into the flow state, the more likely the flow will be systematic and systemic, higher order, you could get into a higher state of consciousness. The more likely you will taste the really real and be drawn into an ongoing transformation for deep conformity to what is most real. But all of this cannot be manufactured. It can be cultivated. Now, the thing about flow is it's grace-filled. Remember what I said? I didn't do this. I didn't do the block. It's graceful. And when somebody's in the flow state, they're extremely graceful, grace-filled. So there is a synergy here. There's things you do, but it's not ultimately done by you. Enlightenment is not found by those who seek it, but only those who seek it will become enlightened. Classic Zen phrase. I propose to you this is the cognitive phenomenological theory of theosis. And I've shown you how this language could form a powerful bridge, not to identify, that's ridiculous, I'm not a historical cultural idiot, but so that we can scientifically compare theosis to Vedantic moksha, to Zen Satari, to the Taoist experience of the Tao. I think that makes it much more plausible. Why? In an epistemological sense, there's been a justification of theosis. Why it is good to pursue it. Thank you very much for your time and attention.